Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first Sunday of Lent. I hope Lent is treating you well so far. And what we're going to be talking about today is really one of the central themes for Lent, and it's Jesus's temptation in the desert. And we're in year C, and so we're talking about this from the perspective of Luke's gospel. Okay, and so what is Jesus doing in the desert in the first place? Well, he's just received Jesus's baptism. Okay, and at his baptism we have revealed Jesus's identity, that he's the beloved Son of the Father. Okay, and that in and of itself is just something we can take with us during Lent. As we're going through prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, we can ask the question, well, why are we doing that? Okay, and we're doing that so that we can get rid of all the things that aren't important in our lives, that we can become detached from those things. Because our primary identity gives us our mission. Okay, so if we know who we are, a thing acts according to its nature. If we know who we are, okay, and what we are, if you will, what and who we are, then we know what we are to do. All right, and sometimes our priorities get messed up. Now, Jesus knows who he is. He's the beloved Son of the Father, and so he goes out on mission. Right? His mission, the reason he was sent to earth, the reason he became incarnate, right? And he goes to do battle with the devil so as to rescue us from the enslavement that we have to sin, all right? And so we can ask ourselves, do we know that we're beloved children of God? That might be number one priority of Lent. First of all, realize who we are. And if we don't know that, what's distorting that image, okay? Now, Jesus, having received his identity, he goes into the desert. And what he's doing in the desert is like, why does he need to fast for 40 days? Well, this is to undo what Israel, or this is to do what Israel couldn't do, okay? So remember, Israel is liberated from Egypt, but then they need to spend 40 years in the desert because it's very clear that they also have lost their identity, and they become attached to that which is taking away their identity. They become attached to the gods of Egypt, all right? So they don't trust God. And how do they do in the desert, right? In the desert, God is trying to woo the hearts of the people back to God, to show them who they are. They're meant to love God. They're meant to be with God. And for 40 years, Israel doesn't do that good, okay? So when they come to the promised land, again, they don't do that good. All right, for 40 years, God is trying to get the gods of Egypt out of them, to get the false gods out of them, and to show them that they are made for love of God. So Jesus goes and does what Israel couldn't do. He, again, is tempted by the devil, and he's tempted in some specific ways, okay? First, after 40 days, Jesus is hungry. But Jesus' response to this is the devil says, well, just turn the stones into bread. You could do that. And Jesus says, one does not live on bread alone. All right. And so one of the reasons that we fast is not to show off to other people, to show how strong we are. We fast because even though food is a necessity, okay, when we take away some of the pleasures such as food, or we at least go a little bit lighter on it, it gives us more of a clarity of what's important in our lives. Okay, so Jesus is going to show that he doesn't need the food yet. And then this has a little bit of a reverse order, but then the devil takes him and shows him all the kingdoms and powers of the world and says, just worship me and I'll give you all of these things. And this really comes to one of the core problems we have in the West and in America is we want power. We want to be in charge. We want to be recognized, right? And a lot of times that temptation can make us lose our priorities. That becomes our false god, money, power, and pleasure, all right? And Jesus is saying, you shall worship the Lord alone. You shall worship the Lord your God, and him alone shall you serve. Okay, so what are these things that we are serving that are taking us away from God, or taking us away from our identity, which we find happiness in serving God? Okay, and then lastly, the devil takes him high up and says, you can throw yourself from this place and the angels will catch you. He's asking him to test God. Okay. And Jesus says, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test, okay? Where are we trying to test God, right? Where are we lacking trust in God? during this Lent, and that's a place to grow in trust with him, and also to grow in faith in him, and not to tempt him, not to say, well, God, if you do this for me, then I will follow you. Okay, the Israelites did that a bunch in the desert. They're like, well, if God does this, and God does. That's the thing. God showed them miracle after miracle after miracle, and they still didn't believe, and they still rebelled. And so Jesus is saying, no signs, no miracles. I trust my Father. And that's what we're called to do during Lent. It is not a conditional faith, right? We love God and we follow him because he is God and because he has been good and created us, okay? So that's a lot there. I know I went through a lot, but there's just a lot in this reading. So we need to learn how to trust God. We need to learn how to give up the things that are blocking our identity as beloved children of the Father, and those things which are making us worship something other than God. So as we approach the table of the Lord today and we receive Jesus, let us ask Jesus, Jesus, help us to live in our true identity as beloved children of God. Help us to find our mission out of that identity, which is to love God and our neighbor, and to serve our neighbors, especially this Lent, with prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, and help our lives to be transformed during this Lent so that one day we may see you in heaven face to face.